Hi, I'm Stewart Spinks and welcome to episode 311 of my podcast, Beekeeping Short and Sweet. Well, now, summer has finally arrived, if only for a few days, and it all feels a little too late for any kind of honey crop bragging rights. It's been disappointing to say the least. That said, we're doing very nicely with our cut comb, and even the section rack looks like it may produce a few saleable squares of delicious honey. Beekeeping Short and Sweet, a beekeeping podcast for the inquisitive beekeeper with a short attention span. A beekeeper, in fact, just like me. This week's podcast is sponsored in part by Modern Beekeeping, suppliers of general beekeeping equipment, including high-density polyhives. These include Paradise National hives, Swenty polyhives, and of course Honeypore hives, my particular favourite. More than this, Modern Beekeeping also supply traditional cedar and pine hives, a range of very effective bee feeds called Apimix and Apipasta, and a full range of all the must-have beekeeping equipment for every beekeeper. For all your beekeeping needs, contact Paul at Modern Beekeeping by visiting their website www.modernbeekeeping.co.uk. Hi everyone, welcome to my beekeeping podcast and, surprise surprise, a mini heatwave, if there is such a thing. 2 very short days of high 20s, 28, 29, even 30 degrees Celsius, and it has most of us heading for the shade and a cold drink, sensibly, I would add. Summer has been a long time coming, and now it's here, it all feels a little too late. That said, I'm not complaining that we have some warmer weather, although it does get a little tiring in a bee suit. Before you know it, it will all be over. Tomorrow, in fact, it seems the heat is dropping back down to a more comfortable 20-ish degrees Celsius, and, of course, yet more showers. Showers I can quite happily cope with. Short, sharp spells of rain followed by some warm sunshine is just fine by me. Plants get to soaking, helping with nectar production, and it clears the air of the oppressive heat that we all seem to struggle with. Well, heat that I struggle with for sure. Thunderstorms too are on the way. That should freshen things up a little, even if it does make for a challenging inspection on honeybee colonies. They really don't like those conditions, do they? And I, for one, will find something else to do while I wait for the weather and the bees to calm down a little. So this week has been an interesting one. Unfortunately, I had to postpone my trip to the Heather Moors for my reconnaissance visit. It was once again too wet and wild for me to spend time squelching around the moors setting up pallets for our hives. I've had to keep one eye on the weather and one eye on the calendar, because although I would prefer some drier, warmer weather for this particular trip, I am very conscious that the end of the month is fast approaching, and certainly in the next week or two I need to start setting up colonies to take to the Heather Moors. The trip to check out the chosen sites has to happen soon, otherwise I'll end up in the same position as I was last year, and that's just not something I want to have to endure. So far, next week is looking a little more favourable. Maybe everything will come together and I can make the trip and start the countdown to taking the bees to the moors. Now, on to the main topic of today's podcast, cut comb and sections. I've been back down to the borage fields and, boy, a little warm weather certainly gets the bees flying. We have quite a mixture of colonies set up in the meadow beside the borage, several smaller nukes. Well, they were smaller nukes, not so much now, thanks to the borage and the emergence of several frames of brood. It's amazing just how many workers you get from just one frame. I don't mean actual numbers, rather the volume, the space that they occupy, the space they fill is incredible, and it goes towards helping fill all of the available space within the small brood box of the nuke and setting these workers on their busy way. Now, I don't expect these nukes to do anything except grow and, with a little assistance from me, survive the winter. Well, fingers crossed. Of the honey production colonies, we have some nice supers of honey filling up steadily. All colonies vary, and I guess what we're looking for is to increase the average amount of honey per hive rather than the headline-grabbing monster colonies we all get occasionally. This year, though, I've sacrificed the drive to a larger honey crop in order to produce some decent frames of cut comb and, along with that, some sections of honeycomb for the first time. It's amazing that we've not done this before, but it is the first time we've used them. So what's all the fuss about cut comb and sections? Let's leave Ross rounds for another week. Today I want to concentrate on the supers and the racks that we have on our hives right now, containing the cut comb frames and the square sections in what are termed racks, and not boxes as I keep calling them. Racks are basically short supers with additional support bars along the bottom to hold the individual wooden squares in place. Each wooden square is normally supplied in the flat, which means you have to make it up yourself. Although you can buy the section rack complete with all the individual sections ready-made with the wax foundation pre-fitted. I had one of these recently from Thorn Bee Hives. It features in several of our videos at the moment, and what I found was, when it arrived, several of the sections had become bashed around in transit, and the wax foundation had been bent out of position. It's simple enough to open the section and refit the square of thin foundation, but it all takes time. From here on in, I'll be making up my own sections, and I think I have a plan that might just help with the overall finish of those sections. More of that in a moment. The Langstroth section rack holds 28 individual sections and has 2 blanking panels with spring clips to hold it all together. It's a very nice piece of equipment and worth every penny. I would say if, and it's a big if you can be bothered to make a few adjustments in order to get the colony to draw the foundation out well, and you're willing to sacrifice some of your honey crop for this premium product. Park that thought and I'll come back to it in a moment. Let's move on to the cut comb sections. Now these, again, take a little work, but the benefits can be fantastic. For most beekeepers here in the UK, it's likely to be a little late to prepare frames for cut comb this season, unless, like me, you're heading to the heather crop, or maybe you have some late flowering Himalayan balsam locally to you, and even then, it might not produce enough for the cut comb. On this, I have to hold my hand up and say I'm no expert. We don't have a lot of balsam near our apiaries, so I have no experience of this particular crop. It may well produce enough for you to get some cut comb from it. Cut comb can be produced in a standard super frame, in a normal super. This means we can all give it a try. You don't need to be an expert carpenter or have a weird toolkit of expensive bits and bobs to be able to set up a few frames of cut comb. And therein lies the beauty of cut comb. If you only have one hive and would like to try to produce some cut comb, it's easy enough to replace one frame of wired foundation with a frame containing unwired thin cut comb foundation. The wires in our normal foundation help give strength to the overall structure, so that when we're extracting honey, the comb doesn't explode out of the frame when it's spinning 1,000,000 miles an hour in our tangential or radial extractors. I have found that some colonies will do such a good job with unwired foundation that they extract, with a little care, quite nicely in our normal electric radial extractor. Anyway, we don't need to worry about extracting cut comb sections because, as the name implies, we cut out the comb from the frame, pick the size of the section we want, and then either using one of those special cutting tools with a plunger on it, or, as I do, slice through the comb with a serrated bread knife, we cut it to the size of the containers that we're using. I actually purchased some specific non-honey food containers for our cut comb because I absolutely detest those flimsy clamshell style cut comb containers that are available out there. I'm really pleased to say that Thorn Beehives now have a custom-made hard case for cut comb, and I'll leave a link in the description for you to go off and have a look at it. Thinking back to the frames prior to going into the supers on a busy summer hive, there is a little preparation that needs to be completed to give yourself the very best chance of getting some quality cut comb. If you have some new frames, make them up, but instead of removing the top bar wedge, that's the bit you cut out, add the wired wax and then nail it back in place to the top bar, leave that bar intact, in place, and don't cut it out. Make up the frame as normal from that point on though. Once you have the frames made up and ready to go, you'll need some cut comb thin foundation and some molten beeswax. I use Capping's wax in a bain-marie, but any kind of bowl over some gently simmering water will be fine. You'll also need a small ladle or old spoon that you can bend the little bowl over a little to make a kind of ladle design. Take a piece of cut comb foundation, and now you have a choice. You can use it as one complete sheet, as we have this year. You can cut it diagonally from corner to corner, or maybe even cut it into 3 starter strips or more. I know some beekeepers out there like to get full value for their money, so maybe even 5 or 6 starter strips. The reason for this is so that the weight of all the worker bees hanging on the foundation doesn't cause that foundation to warp and buckle. Although looking at the cut comb frames that we have in place this year, they've all done very nicely. Thank you very much. So, having decided how frugal you want to be with your foundation, place the strip of wax into the groove in the top bar and trickle some molten wax all the way along the groove to securely fix the wax in place. This is the process we've followed this year, and it's worked really well for us. As ever, preparation is the key, but if you only want 1 or 2 frames of cut comb, it really won't take you that long at all. Once you have the frames ready, just make sure that you're able to hang it in a super so the wax doesn't flop to one side and either weaken the wax joint at the top bar or sets a buckle within the wax that the bees then follow as they draw it out into comb. You might want to mark up the top bar with some indicator that it's cut comb. This is so you don't inadvertently lift it out and tip it on its side when you're inspecting. This will undoubtedly have the effect of causing it to flop over and break away from the frame, a sad end to all the hard work that you and your bees have put in to try to produce some cut comb. Now here's the fun bit. You just sit back and wait, as we have. And this week, checking in on the bees, we've found they've done a fantastic job at pulling out the wax foundation into comb and filling it with some lovely borage honey. Pretty much all of the frames are drawn. Most are getting capped, and I suspect when we go back to the hives in about a week to 10 days' time, we'll have fully capped frames of delicious borage honey ready for processing. As I said earlier, it's most likely too late for the main summer nectar flow, but if, like me, you're heading to some heather, then now is the perfect time to get these frames made up and ready to go onto the colonies immediately prior to heading to the heather moors. Now, I mentioned making a few adjustments to the section comb setup to try to get the bees to draw these tricky squares of wax foundation out to the sides and fully extended on each side, making them your most valuable of products to proudly display at your farmers markets. First though, there's a huge caveat. Honestly, I haven't yet tried this technique, and what I'm about to tell you is really something I'm going to try. I think it's going to work though, and if I'm totally honest with you, it wouldn't be right to talk about this little tip without owning up to the fact that this is going to be the first time that I'm trying it. So, 2 slight changes to the way the sections are put together that may make all the difference to how they work, how they're drawn out and then filled with honey. First off, buy them in the flat. Then, make up a bain-marie once more, but this time grab a paintbrush. The plan is to paint molten wax on each side of the inner faces of this section square and make it a good thick coating too. Personally, I think this will take a little care, so don't do it in a mad rush. Also, I think the groove where the foundation fits needs to be kept clean of wax, and also keeping the folded corner sections clear so that they can be moistened with some water so that allows them to bend without snapping is also likely to be very important. So that's phase 1. Next we come to inserting the wax foundation. Again, I'm in 2 minds about this. I haven't tried it before, and the sections that I've been practicing with at the borage fields are all doing fine. They appear flat and well drawn out, but not extended into the corners and sides. I have found some advice that suggests cutting the foundation and leaving a gap in the middle so that the bees can keep that foundation nice and flat as they draw it out. The gap needs to be something around 5 to 7 millimetres apparently. I think this can be achieved easily enough, but it may just be extra work for no advantage. That said, this comes from a very reliable source of information, and who am I to question years and years of experience? The cut foundation is fixed in place with a dribble of molten wax, and I guess the idea is that the bees start drawing the comb from the top, up from the bottom, and join it together in the middle, nice and flat. So the best solution here for me is to experiment with a few of these sections, some with complete squares, some with these cutouts, and see what happens. The source of this information is, of course, the book on heather honey by Michael Badger, MBE. I'll link it in the podcast notes. Fingers crossed we can get all of this preparation work completed in time, and that the weather remains fine now into the coming weeks as our summer nectar flow comes to an end. Finally today, a teaser for the coming weeks. Varroa-resistant colonies. It's something I've wanted to explore for some time and feel now is as good a time as any. I'm hoping to chat to a few beekeepers about what they've found, and of course this goes against everything that I've always felt about managing honeybee colonies and treating for varroa mites. If you do have any experience with varroa resistance, either positive or negative, please do get in touch. I'd love to hear from you, so do drop me an email. That's info@norfolk-honey.co.uk. I'm quite excited to see where this particular investigation will take me. Well, that's it for this week. Don't forget to check out my website, www.norfolk-honey.co.uk, and for my latest videos and podcasts with more updates, tips and techniques, it's the same Patreon page, www.patreon.com/Norfolk Honey. And remember, I'm Stewart Spinks, and that was Beekeeping Short and Sweet.